Does my sound
Hey,
okay? Because I'm gonna
yeah,
turn.
we are live. Hey everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Get Money Show. I'm gonna wait for some of you guys to get in the room. In the meantime, we're also going to be on Instagram. As always, we are live on Instagram and on YouTube. So if you see my head spinning back and forth or moving back and forth, that's because I'm addressing you guys here on YouTube. And I'm also addressing the Instagram audience as well. We have Ginger Dean live with us today. I'm so excited about this live stream because money is such a sensitive topic. And it's something that we shy away from even talking about. And
Mhm.
so this live stream or this episode is going to be for you if you have a man or a woman, if you
Mhm.
identify as a woman, man, non-binary or otherwise. This is live stream is going to be for you if you are someone who needs to talk to anyone else about your money. Okay? This
Yes.
is so important. And we named it money questions to ask your man because it kind of gets y'all in the room, but it's for anybody, right? It's for anybody. Hey, Dr. Nicole, thanks for joining us. She's from North Carolina. Karen is here as well. She's in New York. And we're going to get this going as soon as I can find you on Instagram. Are you already on Instagram, Ginger?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram.
All
Hi,
right, let me see.
everyone. So I'm gonna be here talking to Gwen about money questions to ask in a relationship.
All right, let me join you. All
Ooh.
right. All right, all right, all right. So do me a favor and share this live. If you are watching and you want someone else to know how to talk to your partner
Mhm.
about money. Karen, today's your birthday. Happy birthday, Karen. I'm so excited for you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday.
I just yeah, okay. I just pulled you on. Okay, awesome.
All right, let me lower my volume on this phone.
Yes. Let me
Get
turn
into this.
it.
Do we
You're
have a
good?
weird connection?
I just turned mine down.
Okay, cool.
Good?
All right. So again, money is a super sensitive topic. It is, if not the number one, but one of the top reasons why people break up, right?
Mhm.
And you know, I feel like I am not somebody who wants to waste my time. I'm at this big age now where
Uh-huh.
like I don't have time for potential.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I need you to be fully potenched when you come to me. Okay.
I'm ready, wait.
Don't show up with don't,
We mean like the basics, you gotta have that intact, right? Like
you
you
gotta
just
have the basics.
yeah, you really do have to have the basics intact. Too many people come without that. Yeah.
And I think it's different for different age groups, right? Like if I was
Mhm.
21, I have a different expectation of the money conversation
Yeah.
than I do at 40 plus, right?
Right. Like I think you'll learn certain things at 20 plus, but I think if I had a daughter in her 20s, I'd be telling her what to ultimately expect. Like what's the goal? Right?
Right.
Like you don't need to marry someone who's going into the casino every Friday night, every payday. That's a
Yeah.
problem. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so at this place and stage, I'm curious about the money questions I should be asking because you know how it is, especially with social media. So
Mhm.
okay, people on Instagram said there's an echo.
Oh,
I have my volume all the way down though.
let me do this. Hold on. Let me everything's is there still an echo?
You guys still hear an echo over there?
Do you guys hear an echo?
Phones ringing, echoes happening, all kind of technical stuff's going on.
Do not disturb.
They said
Okay.
it's too loud, there's an echo. I don't hear an echo.
All right. Let's
So
yeah, I don't hear an echo on my end either.
I
Do
don't
you
know.
guys hear an echo?
I
My
don't think
folks,
YouTube is experiencing an echo.
do you guys hear an echo?
They said it's better.
It's
Somebody
better.
says it's better. Okay.
Okay.
Somebody
Okay.
else says it's still there. I don't know. I don't know what's up with Instagram, but YouTube doesn't
We'll
have
talk
an echo.
afterwards. Hopefully it'll
Okay.
be
There's no echo on YouTube. So if you
okay.
want to, if you want to not experience an echo at all, you can come over to YouTube. You can simply go to YouTube and search for The Get Money Show. The
Uh-huh.
Get Money Show on YouTube. And that's where everybody is. It also allows us to share a screen, share links, that sort of thing. You can't do that on Instagram. So if you want to not experience that, come on over to YouTube to search for The Get Money Show. Okay. It's at the
They're
bottom
saying
is
yours
echoing.
is echoing.
I don't know why mine is echoing.
Is your phone muted
No.
on Instagram? Make sure that like the
How do I do
volume,
that? Oh, okay. How about
like
now?
turn the notifications. Yeah,
How about now?
better now, everyone.
I have my mic muted now. I don't
Okay.
know. My volume's all the way down on my phone. I don't know what else to
Yeah,
do.
it should be fine now because both of our volumes are down on our phone.
Okay. All right. So let's get into it. So again, at my age, right? Like I don't want my time wasted. Like I said, I need you to be fully potential when you show up. I'm not looking for potential. I think on social media though, there's become this sentiment that if somebody brings up money, they're automatically, you know, a gold digger. And I think we have to balance that line between how do I
Correct.
ask you the questions I need to know? Like I desperately need to know these answers because I don't want to waste my
Right.
time with you for a year only to find out, like you said, like you're a serial gambler and have a 200 credit score, and all these other things after my heart is involved, right? I need
Right.
to know these things up front. So let's just get right into it. At what point, Ginger, can we
Mhm.
start to ask money questions, right? At what stage of the relationship, right? Talking, dating, close to marriage,
Mhm.
whatever. And then when we do start to ask those questions, like how do we do it in a way that feels, feminine and, doesn't put them off? And also, there
Uh-huh.
are people on here who are married, right?
Yeah.
And they
Mhm.
have challenges with discuss or they're in very long-term relationships, right?
Right.
And they haven't really had those deep conversations because they keep avoiding them. So I want to address
Right.
both people. People like me who is out here in this dating pool trying to figure it out, and then people who are already
And
in, deep committed relationships and they need to discuss money.
I think in hindsight, a lot of people are realizing they should ask those questions before they get into a committed relationship
Mm,
and I think people are like, oh my God, that's just too early. But if we're getting into a committed, and let me say this, let me back up. I think with regards to today's dating culture, because I often have to say it on Instagram, is you got to decide what camp are you in. And I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying it to be rude or to offend anyone. You
mm,
have to decide whether or not you are in the healthy long term relationship camp or you're in the camp of the pseudo sex worker that's just looking for money, right? So
okay.
therefore, you don't care if you're going to go out with this person and you don't necessarily care if it's a free dinner and you never see them again because as far as you're concerned you got a free trip, a free dinner, whatever
Mm,
it is, and you're just looking to get your nails done. And like, I'm not talking to those folks, right? Because
okay.
people will often ask me certain questions. Well, should they be paying for my nails before the first date? No, right?
Mhm,
That's just the other side of the internet. So this side of the internet, as far as my context, I'm talking about I want to be in a healthy long-term relationship,
mhm,
right? And so I think that before we talk about commitment,
mhm,
we should be talking about money. You know what I mean? I don't need to know
mhm,
necessarily your debt amounts, right? But are you running away from child support enforcement, for example? Do you have collections that you're not trying to pay? Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like the things
mhm,
that can actually impact us. Do you live in a state, for example, where if that person's paying child support and you guys get married, then are they going to tax or not tax, but like try to get your check as well. So then if
mhm,
that person is running away from a child support enforcement and you get married to them, they're
mhm,
going to come for your check. I think those are things that
mhm,
should be discussed upfront. And I think mature adults who are not just looking for fun are trying to make sure that you are also compatible early on as well. Because, like you said, we have been through the phase of chemistry and having fun, and then we go, this person does not manage money well. This
yeah.
person is hiding from collections. This person, I mean, I know married couples that go Dutch, right? So these are things I think you should be asking early.
Mhm, mhm. And before we keep moving on, I would be remiss if I did not introduce you. So
Yeah.
Ginger is a friend, but beyond
Mhm.
that, she is a psychotherapist who specializes in helping women who are exiting toxic relationships or trying to exit toxic relationships.
Yes.
And that could be for a wide variety of reasons. It could be money related, it could be emotional damage, what have you, right? But that's what she specializes in. She's really, really, really good at it. And you can find her on Instagram, for those of you who are not watching Instagram, at Loving Me After We. She's also the author of the best-selling book that just recently came out.
Yes, in July.
Loving Me After We. And her tips, and when I met her, she wasn't even doing this kind of work. I don't think you were doing other stuff with money, related to money. Girls just want to have funds. And I think you are such a great person to have this discussion with, because you work in the emotional space now with women, but then you've also worked with money, and so there's not very many people who do both. So I really wanted to have you on the show for that reason. So just to kind of give people, who we're talking to, we ain't talking to no scrub. Okay. So we're talking to somebody who know what the hell they're talking about. But there's that. If you are just now watching the Get Money Show and you have not been here before and you're not already a subscriber, I need you to click the subscribe button for me. That does a couple of things. One, it allows, and click the like button, click the thumbs up. It allows YouTube to know this is the kind of content that you like. So you will receive more of this type of content from myself and other creators as well. And it lets the algorithm know that this is a great episode, that it should share this episode with other people so we can spread the word, right? Sharing is caring. We're not here for gatekeeping. So please do me that favor and hit the bell for notifications as well. All right. So let's get back into it. So you said that you should be asking these questions like early on, right? But how do we phrase it? Like, can I just, okay, you said before we even get into a committed relationship. So let's say I'm dating somebody, right? We've been dating. I really feel like if we're dating and we're not, different people may feel different things, but I feel like if we're dating and we're at the point where we're kind of like moving toward that, and it's been like 3 months and we're not committed yet, I'm about to drop you. Like, you're wasting my time.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
Because one of the things I'll tell the girls, like I have this course called the Conscious Love After Heartbreak. You really need to decide how long you're going to date somebody before you say, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? I know people who are dating people for like 8, 9, 10 months and they're in limbo with each other. And they don't know anything about their money situation either. They're just going on vibes and Netflix and chill nights. You know what I mean? And so you definitely have to be asking those questions early and just get to know them. But how long are we dating people before we say, what are we doing here? Some people will, and I think this part makes my teeth itch. Girls will say to me, well, I'm waiting on him to, bring it up. But that man knows that, or that person knows that. So they're willing to string you along until you get tired of the ambiguity of the status in a relationship.
Because you haven't set a boundary.
Right. And they'll be like, well, I'll just keep on dating other people. Well, on this side of the internet, y'all are not dating other people typically. What you're doing is hung up on this one person and you're waiting on this one person, because if they're continuing to see that one person, they're still hung up on that person. When they really want a relationship, they're willing to say, you know what? It's been 10 weeks. It's been 8 weeks. It's been 12 weeks. We don't really know what we want to do yet. I think it's just time for us to leave it here.
Gotcha. Okay. So if we've been dating, let's say we're still in the talking stage, right? We won't get to the marriage and all that sort of stuff later, but we're in the talking stage and it's been coming up on 2 months, but you said that we need to know about their money situation before we even get to a committed boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, right?
Yeah.
So how do I ask that, right? How do I say, what kind of debt you got? You know what I mean? How do I ask that?
I like to let things naturally come up. And if I'm really curious about something, I might say, hey, let's watch a show like Billions, right? Billions on Showtime. And so naturally, just different questions about investing, money, budgeting, things like that come up all the time. And so I don't necessarily believe in like, hi, do we need to talk later and have a stack of questions to ask? I think naturally, as you get to know someone, I think you have to be willing to let certain things naturally come up and say, okay, well, I want to know this, and I'll find a way to weave it in. So for example, and this is not a money question, but I thought it was interesting. This person said it to me. He was divorced and he said to me, oh yeah, I have my kids half the time or whatever, but my kids decide on my dating time. And I was like, oh, really? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Yeah. He's just like, yeah, they kind of let me know when they're okay with me going out on a date. And I said,
Okay.
"Oh, okay." And I said, "I just don't know that that's gonna really be." I was like, "How did that come up? What did you guys do this weekend? How's everything going? Are they went had some kind of a sports thing?" I was asking about it. And
Yeah.
he just happened. Sometimes you have to be willing to just let people talk, right? Instead of
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna just go in there and like ask a bunch of questions because I wanted to know what that dynamic was like. Because there are some people, there's this thing called divorced dad guilt where or divorced mom guilt sometimes where like you kind of let your kids just take over your dating life and it runs it and there's no boundaries there. And so I wanted to know more about that. And he just kind of ran his mouth. And I was like, oh, okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a boundary issue. And so therefore when
Mm-hmm.
he just essentially just laid it out there, I just said, I don't know that that's going to work because I think as an adult, you have to be willing to say, mommy, daddy, I'm gonna go out and this is what you're gonna do in the meantime
Mm-hmm.
because I can understand if your kid does not like the person, but it's
Yeah.
a different case with them telling you when you can go out. And that's what he was
Sure.
explaining to me. And I was like, okay. So I think it's okay for you to let certain things naturally come up. But
Uh-huh.
I think what we tend to do is we come in with an agenda and we want to fire off 20 questions as
Uh-huh.
if that doesn't feel good to anyone. So I think it just naturally has to come up. Now, if it's nearing 4 months, nearing 3 months, and y'all haven't and it hasn't naturally come up, then set a stage for it to come up. But just I don't like the I'm gonna go in with 20 questions about finances
Yeah.
tactic because
We need to have a money talk, right?
right, like
Right.
it feels defensive because it's a leading cause of divorce. So like
Mm-hmm.
it feels just defensive. Like you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Like people are just like, oh, like, oh
Right.
yeah, sure. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of emotions around money. So
This is true. So, okay. I like the idea of it just coming up or, watching a show or whatever, trying to like create, like you said, set the stage for it to come
mhm,
up. And if you guys have questions or comments, please comment them over in the comments and we'll ask gender them or address them.
mhm,
Um, but I have two thoughts. So one, and I learned this from you. You posted
mhm.
ones because you always have these really great quotes on your feed. And one of them was something along the lines of it doesn't matter if you like somebody, what matters is are they good for you? Like that's the question you should be asking.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like not do I like this person, but are they good for me?
yes.
Because I think everybody is the one, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's a professor at such and such company or at such and such
Right, it got
university, and
stuff in your head.
he's
Right.
6'2" and he's cute. And we have great conversations. He's it. Thanks, God. And then and then 4 weeks, you have a like probationary period with me, like
Yeah.
15 to 30 days. That's like that's what you got. You mess up within the 15
Mhm.
to 30 days, like I'm cutting you off because I'm not about wasting my time. And
Right.
so, we get to day 25 and it's like, nope, wasn't it? And so it's like all these all these false starts. But so I love that. So I just wanted to impart that on people. It's not so much about do you like them, because you can like anybody, right?
Right.
Like you can have a good conversation with anybody. You can have chemistry with
Right.
anybody.
Right. Like so
Yeah.
many people will be like, "Oh, we have good chemistry." Do y'all realize that good chemistry is just being able to have a great conversation together? But a lot of
Mhm.
people also think of it as like, "Oh, do I get the tingle in my crotch when I'm talking to them?" That's chemistry. And it's
Yeah.
like, I
No, you're
think
just horny.
right. Like I think because I can talk to anyone, it's like I have chemistry with pretty much everybody I talk to for the most part. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, but we only go based on like what the tingle is. And I'm like, we gotta go a little bit
Yeah.
deeper than that. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but are they good for me? And I think like this money question is one of those, are they good for me?
Right.
Because again, depending on the age and the stage of your life that you're in, you should have different requirements and standards. And for me, and this, you can tell me if this is, if I should expand this or kind of change it. But for me personally, like y'all, this live is as much for y'all as it is for me. Okay. Um, for me, for me personally, I'm like, I don't honestly care how much money you make. Like, I
Right.
mean, you need to make a certain, you got to have income, right? You have to make something. I'm more concerned with how well you manage your money. How much money do you keep, right? Because I have dated people or gone out on dates with people who have, make $300,000-$400,000 a year, but they
Rich.
don't have any money because they're
Right.
spending it all, right? And
Mhm.
then I've dated people who make $80,000, $100,000, whatever. And they got their 401k together. They got their fully funded emergency savings together. Like their credit score is high. You know what I mean? Like they're managing it better. So to me, it's like, I don't care so much about your money. Like I went out with one guy, true story, everybody, true story. Met this guy, super sweet, right? Y'all, I promise you, when I finally get married again, I'm going to release a book of all my wild dating stories, and I promise you they're gonna turn into a movie. It's gonna be a blockbuster, and it's gonna be incredible. But I met this guy who was really nice, kind of sort of my type physically, not really, but it was doable. We go on our first date. He takes me to this restaurant, spends $300 on the dinner. I'm like, right? I live in Detroit, right? That's a lot for a dinner in Detroit, right? Maybe not for New York or whatever, but for here, that's a lot of money. So I'm like, okay. So he comes with 12 long stem roses. He's super sweet, da da da. Prior to this date, I said to him, what are your favorite restaurants to eat at in the city? He's told me 2 restaurants. We get to the restaurant. He shows up with his long stem roses, and we walk in the door. This is one of the restaurants that he said that he had been to, that he loved so much, right? We walk in the door. He looks around. He's like, oh, this is nice. And I'm like, I thought you said you've been here before. And he's like, oh, I didn't say that. I was like, you absolutely said it. I have it in the text message because I always had the receipts, right? So I'm like, you definitely said that. And he's like, oh, I just meant that it would be a place I would like to come. Maybe I misunderstood your question. I'm like, okay. So we eat. Dinner's $300, $350. We eat. I'm like, oh my goodness. He then leaves a tip. He leaves a $10 tip. And I'm like mortified because I'm like, we ain't about to be the black people that don't tip well, right? Just being completely honest, right? So I was like, maybe he was just nervous and didn't really like pay attention to the amount or whatever. Like, I'll bring it up at some point later.
Did he pay the bill and
he paid the bill? He paid the bill and his $10 tip.
Okay.
So then the next week we go out to another restaurant, an even more expensive restaurant. This bill is like $450. And it was his birthday, right? So I'm like, you don't have to do this for me on your birthday. He's like, no, I want to take you out. You deserve the best. Da, da, da. So we go to this restaurant. Everybody's all dressed up. He brings his friends. His friends are there to meet me. Like he's, on the verge of starting to claim me. We only been dating for like a week and a half at this point. So bill's $450. He leaves a $20 tip. And I'm like, what is up? Right? Long story short, we continue. And I asked him about this. He's like, oh, I didn't even realize, I just left my standard. I'm not normally whining and dining women all like that. You the first one because I'm so special. Right. So long story short, he told me when we met that he was a robot programmer. Okay. And I'm like, oh, that sounds nice. Of course I'm Googling like how much they make, And so we're talking one day and I naturally bring up, to your point, or it just kind of organically happens. We start talking about investing. And so he's like, oh yeah, I'm fully vested in my 401k and my job. And, I'm investing like 20% of my check and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, that's great. So I'm saying all this because people can lie. Right. And so he told me one day that he was going to ask his boss for a raise. And I thought that was strange because I was like, well, at this level that you're at, you're not really asking for a raise. You like get a raise every year.
Yeah, they just give it to
for a performance review, right? Like you don't really go and ask. You either get a raise or you just leave and find another job. And so, when you tell a lie, you have to remember your lie, right? So he sends me a screenshot one day of the email that he sent to his boss asking for the raise.
Okay.
And it's a whole email. And at the bottom, it has his name and his title. And it said, whatever his name was. And at the bottom, it said maintenance lead. And I was like, is this man the janitor? Like, what? Why did you lie?
Yeah. And then really that he lied about it. He didn't.
Like the fact that you're a janitor doesn't make a difference to me. But it's like why? Right. You know what I mean? And then he made it. He's like, I make all this money and then I can afford all these things. Like, no, you can't. You can't afford these $300 dinners. That's why you left a $10 tip. You can't afford $450 dinner. So that's why you left a $20 tip. You know what I mean? So it's like, you're trying to impress me, but I didn't even need all that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so it's like, how do you circumvent that? Right? Like, luckily, he ended up kind of showing himself, accidentally.
So what
But
happened? Did you address it?
yeah, I was like, I thought you were the robot programmer. Like, what? And so he's like, oh, he came up with some other, like, because once you lie, you got to keep lying.
Right.
He's like, oh, well, I lead the maintenance team who handles the robot programming, but I'm also a robot programmer. It just wasn't making sense. Like, the math wasn't mathing anymore. And I'm just like, sir, like, it's not making sense. On top of that, I ended up finding out that he told me he was in the process of buying a house, found out that he lived in a trailer park. And again, this is no shade to any of those things, right?
Right.
But if you live in a trailer park, you live in a trailer park. I care less, right? But
Right.
I'm just like, luckily we were within that probationary period, right? That 15, that 0 to 30 days with me, right? But what if we were like 10 months down the line and I wasn't as nosy as I am, right? I wasn't asking all these questions.
Right.
Like, how do you prevent, how do you get the truth, Ginger? Like, this is not the first person who's lied to me about their
did though, right? Like,
yeah.
I always say this, I pray the prayer of clarity. Please give me the information I need to know about this person so that I can make the best decision, about them moving forward. I literally just sit and wait. Like, I know what I want to know. I want to hear about your kids. I want to hear about, finances, just different things, and it will literally just come up. Now, if it doesn't come up by a certain point, do I make it a point to? I think here's the thing too. I will say this. I think that when you're at a certain tax bracket, certain things just naturally will come up, right? Or depending on the type of person that you're dating, it will naturally come up. If you are hyper focused on just vibes, it's not going to come up. But I think that if you are focused on this being a healthy relationship, we have healthy conversations, are we compatible? Certain things will just naturally come up. And for me, and maybe it's just because of what I do for a living, I can just kind of set the stage and it just comes up. But I just think that you got the information that you needed, right? Because you were thinking to yourself, why are we gonna go to this expensive restaurant? Okay, I wonder what that's about. Okay. And you went along with it. But I genuinely believe that whenever we have these questions, our unconscious mind says, okay, let's help you figure that out. And then you hold on himself. That's how people tell on themselves. Because think about it. How is he going to continue taking you out on $500 dates?
Right.
What will be $500 dates? That's a lot. I mean, that's a lot for anybody. So how was he probably wasn't gonna be able to do that, because then on date 7, he'd have probably been like, oh, we're gonna go to McDonald's.
Right.
And the thing is, you never asked for him to do that. And that's where I think that I don't know, like, I think it depends, right? Like, I think that if you're dating someone who is truly level-headed when it comes to finances, you're good to go. But I think that because when sometimes we're dating people who are maybe not in a similar tax bracket, then I think sometimes issues come up for a variety of reasons, right? Like it was on another page yesterday, and I have to stop like going back and forth with people, but like we were talking about dating down on that page, right? And I was saying that historically, a lot of men do date down, right? They don't like to call it that because it doesn't make them look good. And then also they were saying that a lot of women today tend to date down, right? Or don't want to date down. So they were offended. And I was like, a lot of men don't like to date women who make more than them. So a lot of you guys do date down, right? You just don't call it that generally because you don't want it to look like, oh, I have to date down, or what does that say about me? So the thing is, I think it's important for you to know at the very least where they lie on the tax bracket, not because you're a gold digger, but once you do figure it out, then you can see, okay, are there things that will come up? Like, I was on live, it was last summer, and some of my followers probably remember this. This guy literally lost his shit because I had said, I have a cleaning lady that comes by every couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, why would you need a cleaning lady? What do you mean? And I was like, because I work really hard.
Yeah.
I like to have someone come through and clean every couple of weeks. I don't want to spend 4 hours cleaning all the time. And I'm a clean freak. So like I like my shit clean.
Yeah.
And so he lost it. He literally just like had a conniption. And I
Because he
told
thought that you were like frivolously spending?
yes. He
Okay.
felt like, well, how dare I spend that money? I could be spending that money taking care of the house because his woman would have to be the one to take care of the house. And this is something I went through in my marriage too. Like
Mm,
my ex-husband, I remember in the last year of my grad program, like if you're in, counseling, psychology, social work, you're doing your practicum, you're doing your internship, and you still have classes. And I had a regular job.
mhm,
So I was living in one state, going to school in another, and
mhm,
he wanted me to literally come back across the bridge and cook his food every single night. I meal prepped on Sunday and Wednesdays. He was like,
mhm,
"No, I want you to come home and cook." And I was like, "Not if I'm
mhm.
going to be able to get through this midterms, get through finals, and still show up for all the things I needed to do."
Yeah.
And so some guys do, I think, some, not all, but they do just tend to have this thing where their woman has to be the one doing the work. So he felt
Mm,
like, well, how dare you have, what did he say? Like, how dare you have someone come and clean you? You should be the one to be doing it. And I was just like, yeah, this is weird. Goodbye. And I blocked him. But
yeah.
literally, I was talking to someone, this is a few years ago, and he was like, if my parents came in town at last minute, like if they just decided they wanted to come over and you were in
Mhm,
Alpharetta, you know, shopping, you'd have to come home and start cleaning the house, even if I were home.
mm,
I was like, okay. So there's like this, it's a sidebar, but it's like a weird mindset. But
yeah.
yeah, back to your point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like that's the almost like internal ego driven, or maybe even like
Right.
wanting
But
a
I have,
mother sort of
right.
thing.
And I have found those are questions you have to ask. How do you feel? For example, a big thing online now is how do you feel about splitting bills? Right?
Yes, or
That's
the 50-50 question.
the 50-50 question. And
Yeah.
I think the people who are arguing about this literally all the time are not in a tax bracket where they can even move that way. And which I find is
Mhm,
so interesting
mhm,
because you can tell who's been in a long-term relationship and who has not been in a long-term
mhm,
relationship,
mhm, mhm,
right? And I think when both of you are making $50,000, you are going to be splitting bills because
mhm,
this economy, it's expensive to live, right? So there are some people who are going to be splitting bills because you have to. You have kids, you have 401ks, you have car payments.
sure.
One person in your 20s, early 30s, making $50,000 a year, I think that's going to be hard for them to manage on their own. Now,
Mhm,
maybe in your late 30s, 40s, as y'all can afford things, you kind of figure things out. But I think the 50-50 conversation can be a very misleading one depending
mhm,
on where you lie in your tax bracket because there are literally women in their early 20s dating someone who's making 50, $60,000 a year. They want to have the Louis Vuitton bag, they want the YSL bag, they want the Mercedes, but the person makes $50,000 a year.
mhm.
He's not going to buy that because he's young and just getting started. You get what I'm
Sure.
saying? And she's just getting started. So I think it really just depends on your context. I think it depends on
Mhm,
your tax bracket. And I think it also depends on your goals as well.
mhm. Okay. I'm gonna come over to Instagram because there's some comments and questions on Instagram.
Mhm.
Um, let me see if I can
Mhm.
find one. I'm kind of
Someone said,
slow.
men
Oh,
lacking financial integrity are miserable. This is a proven fact.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm human, not happy says some men are ridiculous with their lying. I met a guy once who lied about reading a book, and when I asked him, he couldn't even tell me what he was reading. Yeah, well, I've learned kind of sidebar, but related. I've also learned like when someone says, "What are you looking for?" Right? Like I don't anymore say what I'm looking for. I have a very vague answer. And my mother
Mhm.
used to always tell me to do this, and I never did it when I was younger, but now that I'm older, I do it. I'm more like, well, I am just looking, to meet somebody, meet people and connect. And, if something comes with that, then it does. Right. It's very vague and open like that. Because the moment you tell them what you want, they become exactly what you said, but it won't actually be them. Right.
Right,
It'll be like a facade,
exactly.
Um, let's see what else. Oh, Queen Fina says not the guy you were talking about, not him sounding like Cookie Monster. You did sound just like Cookie Monster a little bit. um, okay. I'm happy not human says very miserable behavior. I had an ex get mad at how much I shopped with my money, but never talked about how much he was smoking and buying.
Oh,
How much weed he was smoking and buying. Yeah.
because he was probably mad because he wanted you to spend that money on his weed habit. But okay.
Yeah. Okay, so like I think so. That's the story I gave was not the first person that I've had that like lied about their financial situation. I had the one we were talking about offline. Prior to that situation, this is a much longer story, but the main point I want to make here is that early on our very first day, I think some of my ladies here and guys here over on the Get Money Show, I may have told part of the story too. He asked me, "Do you know your net worth?" on our first date.
Yeah.
And I thought that was strange. And I was like, yeah. He's like, what is it? And I said, what's yours? Like what? And so he says, he's like, oh, mine. He's like, mine's on Google. And I said, okay. So then he goes to what looked like Google and he pulls up the screenshot that says his net worth was between $2 million and $5 million. Great. I'm like, congratulations. Whatever. I don't know what you want me to say, So we go on with the date. Later on, I'm thinking like that's such a weird thing to ask somebody, right? Especially on a first date. Like I get the money question has to come up, but who says that? Like,
Right.
on a first date, I ended up finding out that he had basically created a Google search image that looked like, so it wasn't it wasn't actually Google. It was because, I'm sorry, let me back up. While we were on the date, he says, mine's on Google. He pulls it up. It has his name. It says net worth, like in the search box. And then it says the very first search was so-and-so's net worth is between $1 and $5 million, right? And so, or $2 and $5 million. And so we're talking and he's like, yeah, and, it's kind of inflated, but you can see it says updated as of August of this year. Like he's adamant about me seeing the dates on this. I'm like, well, how are they really going to know your net worth? Like they have no idea what assets you have or don't. He's like, well, it's pretty accurate. I can tell you mine is between $2.5 to $3 million. And my friend Larry is on here laughing because he knows this story, right? And so I ended up realizing later on, towards the end of our time together, that he had either gone on Canva or paid somebody on Fiverr or something to create this screenshot, because if you search that same name with net worth, nothing comes up. Nothing whatsoever shows up.
Oh.
And I was confused at first, like, wait a minute, it's only been like 4 days since he showed me that. It would still be like the algorithm would still show it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I'm on page 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of Google searching for this, and it doesn't exist. And I'm like, this fool literally just
people
made
are not thinking, oh, he was lying. You know what I mean? Right.
Because I think he just has it in his arsenal and he pulls it up when he goes on dates because it's probably impressive to a lot of women that he dates, but he ain't ever dated Gwen before. So I'm not super impressed by that. Because again, I'm more concerned about how do you keep your money, less about how much money you make, right? And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. But anyway, so girl, it was a picture because he never tapped on the actual image or the actual search. He just showed it to me. And then when I asked him about it later, I'm like, hey, what website were you? Oh, I don't remember the website. Just search the name and net worth, like, and then other stuff just wasn't adding up. Like where he lived didn't coincide with that kind of net worth. You know what I'm saying? It was just like, why? And so again, these are people that will just lie about stuff because they want to impress you. But to your point, it's like, how are you gonna keep this lie up? The first guy with the dinners, it's like, how many of these $400, $500 dinner dates can you afford? At some point, we're at Golden Corral or McDonald's, right? Like, and now you done set the bar for what is expected, and now you can't afford it. How were you planning to explain this away?
Exactly.
At some point.
And even on, what is it, a robot programmer's salary, that's still not necessarily smart to be doing, right? Because if you're doing that with every single person you're spending $2,500 a month at least on those dinners, plus like the smaller dates that you're going to go on. Those are things where, are you over leveraged, sir? You know what I mean? Like I remember dating someone and I was just like, because generally I could count his money and I was just like, you're over leveraged. Like you have a spending habit. And it was a whole turnoff. I didn't care about the car that he drove in. His house was like double the size of mine. And I was just like, yeah, but you're over leveraged and you have a spending habit.
Mhm.
And I made more than him, but he was spending more than me, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was just like, "Oh, this is not gonna be good long term," right? Because at
Mhm.
some point, you know how they say you rob Peter to pay Paul? I felt like that
Yeah.
was what was gonna start happening because he wasn't
Yeah.
saving me. So, yeah, I think those things naturally come up if you're paying attention, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you're so hung up on and then I'm not saying this is not you, but I
Mhm.
think for women who are hung up on $200 dates, $500 dates, you won't catch
Mhm.
those things because you're just hung up on that. Next
Mhm.
thing you get married and now you have financial issues and oh, the age old thing of, well, I just let him handle everything. And then now you're in a
Yeah.
shithole with someone financially and you didn't realize it because you're not asking the right questions. So that's why I think
Mhm.
before I really, really catch feelings with you, we're going to go on some dates, but we're also going to talk about those things before we get into a
Mhm.
commitment because
Yeah.
I'm not trying to catch feelings for someone and be so head over heels in love with someone who is hiding from child support enforcement, for
Mhm.
example. Like I
Mhm.
know someone they came back from like a cruise and basically they got put in jail because they owe child support. Can you
Yeah.
imagine? Those
Yeah.
are things that I would want to know before we get on that boat,
Yeah.
because apparently child support enforcement in that state, they like
Mhm. Yeah, they'll come after you.
things and like
Yeah.
they figure it out. So
Yeah.
those are things that I would want to know before I go forward. So I
Yeah.
think like just naturally, I think things will come up. If you get married to someone, like in your last relationship, did you have issues around like money management? How do you feel about budgeting, for example? And just have
Mhm.
it naturally come up. You can ask some questions about like what are your biggest money goals right now?
Mhm.
Right? Like, and again, I think that when you set the stage for big, for example, you talk about investments, you're like
Yeah.
the reason why I invested in like my last one,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're naturally having like certain conversations, things are going to come up because you have an
Yeah.
interest in it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I'm talking about Nvidia, right, and what's going on with them, I'm like, okay, so what do you think about that? Then you'll know
Mhm.
whether or not there's someone who dabbles in investments, if they're paying
Mhm.
attention to the stock market, and then you can get into like budgeting. Someone
Yeah.
had asked earlier, and I was trying to make sure that I didn't miss her question. I think she said, when is the best time to ask someone about their
Credit score.
when is the best time to discuss credit score with someone that you're dating? I think before commitment,
Yeah.
right? I think also it just kind of depends on that person too. Like people's credit scores fluctuate for generally, and I think especially when you're running a business, it can as well. But
Sure.
I think that when you set the stage for being the type of person that you are, where you're having those conversations on a regular basis in your general life, and they know that, then it
Mhm.
won't seem so crazy when you bring up certain topics. Like
Mhm.
someone wouldn't think it's crazy for you to talk about investing. It's something that you're like very much interested in. Like you have a
Right.
whole podcast about it. So like, why wouldn't you? Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. You know what? I'm gonna come back to that, but I want to answer or read some of these comments over here on Instagram real quick.
Mhm.
Somebody asked, I
Mhm.
think the guy you were talking about, where'd it go? I don't know where it went. I don't see it anymore. But I'm happy not human says, I'm looking for someone who aligns with me, period. If you do, great. If you don't, then you'll know. Yeah. Um, was somebody that you were talking about, Ginger?
Which one?
She said Queen Athena said, was he the guy that said he dated Serena Williams and Tiffany Haddish by any chance? Was that the same guy?
No.
These guys are
Um,
wild. Okay,
they-
so somebody else says, loving this conversation.
oh, it is.
I've
Oops.
noticed,
It's
I've
in my
noticed,
left. Thank you.
I've noticed, somebody said, loving this conversation. I've noticed that ever since The Tinder Swindler on Netflix, there's a new breed of scammer men who will promise you the world under the guise of scamming you in the end.
Yeah.
Child, I have so many stories. Oh my gosh. I promise you it's gonna be a movie. I promise you.
Oh
I,
my
I
God.
could we could be on here all day talking about these stories that I have.
But what
Child,
are they
okay.
doing though? But in a nutshell, what are they doing though in order to like I know we have homosexuals, right? We're in cupping season right now, so homosexuals want a place to stay. So they're gonna be calling these
Homosexuals.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but what are scammer men doing?
Well, I think that they will.
Or scammers in general? Like, what are they doing when they scam
Well,
too?
like to the point, like they'll just lie, right? I think at the core of scamming is lying, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like the first guy that I mentioned that was the janitor, but he told me he was a robot programmer.
Yeah.
Like maybe he didn't really scam me per se, but like he lied. It's like you led me to believe something that wasn't true under the guise of whatever his mission was, whether it was just to like
Yeah.
lock me in or get me to really like him or whatever, right? So that we could see that as scamming. The other guy who I mentioned had the fake Google search. I mean, that's come
Mhm.
on, right? Like, again, that's like a way for somebody to attempt to impress you because they think that may be something that is going to draw you in, right? But
Right.
I will tell you about a real scammer. Okay.
Mhm.
So this was a couple of weeks ago. This just happened. And y'all over here and get my shine. I ain't told y'all this story yet, but I'm gonna tell y'all now. So I was out at this I'm on the board of an organization here in Michigan. So I was at they had an annual fundraiser. I'm at the board event. Board event's over. My son was actually staying at his dad's house that night. So I'm like, I got the evening free. I'm about to find something to do. So every Wednesday there's this hotel that has like a rooftop kind of event, right? So I'm like, I'm gonna go down there because I haven't been. So I go over there, I hang out, I mind my business, I'm not talking to anybody, and my phone starts to die. So I'm like, oh, I should probably leave because my phone's gonna die. So I get ready to leave. As I'm leaving, I walk by the bar and this guy stops me. He says, I like your shirt. And I was like, thanks. So I tell him, like, I've been getting a lot of compliments on this shirt today. And he's like, that strikes up a conversation, right? He tells me his name, he tells me his age, he told me what he did for a living, which was a licensed CPA. And he told me he was 37. He told me his name, age, 37. Where he grew up in the
Mhm.
city and where he lives now.
Okay.
Okay. So I said, okay. And so I was like, well, my phone's about to, we're talking and everything and making small talk. Clearly there's an attraction. So he says, I said, my phone is dying. I'm going to go. He said, well, take my number down and then text me when you get to the car and give me yours. I said, okay, cool. So he tells me, I give him my phone. He puts his name in my phone and he puts his first name. Let's call him Chris. Okay. He says Chris and he puts P. So I'm like, what's the P for? And he says, let's say Pratt. No, that's a real person. We'll use Chris Pratt. Let's say Parker. Okay. So he says
Mhm.
Chris P. So I was like, oh, okay. So he puts his name in my phone and I leave. I text him. I say, hey, this is Gwen. It's nice to meet you. He says, nice to meet you too. I talk, I'm like, looking forward to talking to you. He says, looking forward to seeing you. So here I am like, okay, I like that energy. Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Right. So
I know where this is going.
okay. So, because I'm like, intentionality, like come with it. You know what I mean? Like let's be intentional about things. So I get home and I fully believe in like because people lie. I believe in like looking people up and finding out what you need to know early on. Cause I'm not trying to be 6 months down the line and then I found out some old BS about you, right? So
Right.
I go and I'm like, Chris Parker is a really common name. Like, it's going to take forever for me to find this person. So I type in Chris Parker. Again, remember, this is not a real name, right? I type in Chris Parker, and I put in the city that he told me he lives in, like the suburb he told me he lives in. I'm thinking it's going to take forever to come up, but nope, it comes right up. And you know what it says? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up a little bit. Put a pin in that, y'all. When we were talking, when he first met me and he said, I like your shirt, he said, what do you do for a living? Are you a business owner? And I thought that was a weird thing to ask because most people are not business owners. So it's
Yeah.
like, why would you automatically assume or even ask if I was a business owner? And I asked him and he was like, oh, well, it's really trendy for people to own businesses now. So I was just wondering if you owned one. I was like, okay. So I let it go.
Trendy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back to the story. So I'm at home. I'm Googling him. I find Chris Parker put in the city. He comes right up. Y'all, only me. This man had a $14 million fraud scam in the state of Pennsylvania and was to be sent. And at first I was like, well, Chris Parker, that's a really common name, right? It can't be the same person. But the article was from this year. So it had his age, which was 37, his name, and the city. And it said he was a licensed CPA. I'm like, that's too many coincidences, right? That can't be like
Right.
the same person. So it had his first, middle, and last name. Let's call him Chris Matthew Parker. Okay.
Mhm.
So then I take Christopher Matthew Parker, and I put it into Google. And it has junior and senior, and it both said the city that he actually grew up in, that he told me he grew up in. I'm like, that's him. Right. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, $14 million PPP scam. So basically, he had scammed the government out of $14 million. And this year, this happened in like September. So the article was saying that in October, he was going to be sentenced to either 30 years in prison or a $1 million fine, and had to give back all of, all his stuff had been seized. Right. So I'm texting this to my group chat the next day, like, y'all, I cannot believe that this kind of stuff happens to me. So they're like, you should ask him if it's him. So I'm like, oh my God. So the next day he texts me. He said, hey, it was so nice to meet you. Da, da, da. We have small talk. And I sent him the article. I was like, is this you? Because I need to know, And he's like, long pause. And he's like, yeah, that's me. And he tells me whatever happened. And he gives me all the excuses and reasons as to why he did it. And I was like, man, like, this is like
is a lot.
$14 million. And I was like, well, you're going to be sentenced soon. Are you worried about it? And he's like, no. He's like, no, I'm not worried about it because you know what? I pled guilty, and I learned my lesson, and it brought me closer to God. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. Like, I'm sure it might have, but you still stole $14 million from people. You know what I mean? So
a lot of people got caught.
I mean, on one hand, I'm like, I admire your ambition, I guess, really? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is crazy. So anyway, so that was the last conversation we had. And so I think he just kind of was like, well, let me just drop this because clearly she ain't about to fool with me, And so these kinds of things come up, and
but this is one
example of a true scammer.
If we're willing to do a background check and find out certain things, why wouldn't we ask those questions early? Like,
right.
And again, I'm not with the whole asking someone's credit score on the first date. No, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's more so like before we get hot and heavy, before we get into a committed relationship, I just think those are all things that you would want to know, not because you necessarily want to judge them, but I think someone's current, like, again, are they actively dodging enforcement actions, for example?
Right.
Are they dodging
people up?
Huh?
You gotta look these people up. You can find everything you want to know. Just search
and
your
I
name.
think
Look
some
right up.
people can give you a really good reasoning and answer because you're having a conversation. Hey, I was on hard times, and but this is what I'm doing right now to rectify, to make things different, do things differently. Ooh, okay, great. And they have evidence of that in their life, sure. But if it's just someone who's just like, no, don't. Yeah. With my ex, I remember we were young and dumb, but like I was the one fixing his credit. I was the one sending in disputes. I was the one who was like, I was calling up the gas company, like, how can we get this off this credit report? Because we were about to buy a house. So we had to clear a lot of stuff off. I would never do that again. You know what I mean? Because in retrospect, like his attitude was just like, he didn't really care. You know what I mean? And so I was just like, I think that attitude tells you a lot about someone's character and a lot about their integrity.
Yeah, so for sure.
People just have to realize, like, I get certain people go on hard times. We're not necessarily talking about those people, right? Because I think everyone gets on hard times. Everyone makes decisions that they're not necessarily proud of. Sure. I think it's more so about like, what are you actively doing about it? And what's the evidence in your life about what you're doing about it? Because
yeah. I think that you've said this a couple of times, and I just want to kind of push this home for people. Like, if you just be quiet and let them talk, a lot of times they will tell you everything you want to know about them.
You will find out so much.
So much. Like, I promise you, I just went on a date last week.
Yes.
It's just not a money thing. And this guy and I are talking, and I just decided, you know what? I'm no longer dating like with this like huge intention to like finding my next husband. I'm just like, just dating, right? For fun, whatever. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We go on the date, and he starts telling me about how women tend to date him and they say too much too soon. He's like, it's just the first day. Why are they telling me all these things? then proceeds to tell me how he um cheated on his wife with five or six women because she wasn't giving him any and she wouldn't clean the kitchen. And I'm like, well,
Yes,
maybe, and
I just talked about this with a client. Yes, go on. Sorry.
I'm like, talk about talking about too much too soon, right? So I'm like,
One
so I'm
of the
just
things,
listening. I'm not even saying anything. I'm just letting him talk, and I'm listening to him, and I'm like, the whole thing. And he's basically has no remorse over cheating on this woman, with five or six different people, and like you didn't cheat on her with half a dozen folks because she didn't clean the kitchen, and
yeah,
then and he tells me how he was like talking to her, and clearly I'm like, well, maybe she didn't feel like, for us, sex is very emotional, right? And so if
right,
you were talking to her the way you're telling me you were talking to her, I wouldn't want to have sex with you either, and so it's probably why she wasn't giving you any, but then you
right.
justified that by sleeping with half a dozen women. He's like, yeah, and I would do it again. And I'm like,
I
oh my
understand
God,
that.
there will be
I
no second date for
understand how
you.
you brought this up because I was on another podcast yesterday, and I was telling her, people say like, what are like these milestones that you need to pay attention to when you're healing after a breakup? And I was like, boundaries, standards, deal
Mhm.
breakers, and core values, right? And I
Yeah.
said, and I don't think people realize this. A lot of people don't have core values. They think
Mm.
they don't. So our core value is fidelity, right? If
Yeah.
that man had a core value of fidelity, which is regardless of what's going on in my marriage, I'm not going to go dip my thing out there into someone else just because I'm
Mhm.
angry. And I literally gave her the example of some people will literally say, and I think I've said it a few times this week, which is why I'm thinking I told her that too, but
Mhm.
they will literally say, well, I wasn't getting any at home, so that's why I cheated. And it will
Yeah.
be straight faced, feeling like, oh, that was justifiable because
Yeah.
I wasn't getting any. So, but I was just saying to her, like, people like that, when you're getting to know them, you need to know what you need to ask those questions. So, let's just say, you're in a relationship and for whatever reason, y'all are having issues and sex isn't hitting like it used to, or y'all are not having it as much as you want to. Then what would you do? What would happen? And just sit back. Not would you cheat?
Mhm.
What would happen, right?
Yeah.
And you'll see who some people are. And so this is
Mhm.
why I'm telling you, like, you need to get to know these folks before you jump into things with them because
Mhm.
there are so many people who have that exact mindset. If I'm not getting what I want at home, I'm gonna go get it from somewhere else. And
Mhm.
they legit feel that way. And then they're the same people who will be like, well, the dating pool sucks. And I'm like, you're part of the reason why it sucks because you do
Yeah.
shit like that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that is literally a thing that I hear so often
Yeah.
that this is why I keep saying, like, you need to know certain things before you really get in hot and heavy with somebody. Like, you really got to say
Mhm.
by day 10 or by week 10, I need to know X, Y, and Z. I need to know all these
Mhm.
different things because at that point, I need to be making a decision as to whether or not this person is
Mhm.
someone that I would want to move forward with.
Yeah, I think that it's important for us to realize that like dating, and I know we still have to talk about the marriage part, right? But
Mhm.
dating is literally collecting data on people.
Yes.
And I think we tend to go, and I've been guilty of this in the past, but I've matured and I'm better at it now. But we would just go off of our feeling, right? Like, oh, I feel so great about this person. I was thinking to myself, like, man, if I really at this age, right? If I was wise enough then, like when I was younger, right?
Mhm.
And the people I dated and even, long-term relationships that I got in, I probably wouldn't have ever got not probably, I wouldn't have ever gotten into some of those relationships because I at 22, 26, 28, I was going off of the feeling like, oh, they make me feel good and they're
Yeah.
funny and we have a great time together and, they're charming and blah, blah, blah. But there were clear and convincing signs very early on before we even got to like a deep relationship part that
Mhm.
this person ain't it. Like the
Like,
things that they're saying aren't adding up with the things that they're doing or
right,
even money related, right? And at 26 I was in a different space than I am now, right? But
right,
even then it was like, wait, you said this is your house, but there's you don't I never see you actually paying the rent and then somebody else is paying the rent like that, you know what I mean? Like just things just weren't adding up, right? But I was like, oh well, you know what? He's funny, let's just go with that. And so I think we have to literally like kind of get out of the, especially for women, because we can be so nurturing, and we tend to be emotional creatures, right? We focus on the emotion that we have, as opposed to like the raw data that's in front of us. And we will
Mhm.
have the clear signs in front of us, and we'll sweep that under the rug because we feel good about this
Right.
person, right?
Right.
And it's like, again, it doesn't matter if I like you. What matters is, are you good for me in all aspects? Are you good
Exactly.
for my life today? And are you good for my future?
And
And
are
if
you good
that
for my
answer is
mental
no,
health?
then we can't keep
Yes.
going.
Right, because we'll just get so caught up in just the feeling. It's, oh, I feel good. It feels good.
Mhm.
Oh, we're going on these the love bombing, essentially,
Yeah.
it can come down to. And I think sometimes you got to put your feelings aside and really ask yourself, but feelings aside, do I like this person as a person? But
Mhm.
also, like, are they good for my future? Right?
Yeah.
If nothing changed, we tend to like get caught up in this is why I'm like, they gotta be fully potential. Like, if
Mhm.
they never change right now, can I
Mhm.
live with this person? Can I be okay and be happy with this situation? Because a
Yeah.
lot of us will date somebody and say, well, it could change down the line. And a lot of guys will say, well, you all want someone fully ready made or something like that. And I
Mhm.
think it's the fact that a lot of women are just coming across men that don't have the basics. And so when
Mhm.
we talk about the basics, really the basics, and they'll kind of take it to be, oh, my live stream ended. Sorry.
Did it have a time limit?
I think mine did.
Oh.
It
It was going
ended.
so good. You can start another one if you want.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
yeah, like they just kind of just don't, they think the basics that women want are
mhm.
perfection, which
Mhm.
I'm always like taking it because I'm like, what do you mean perfection? Like, they want you to be paying your bills consistently. They want you to be paying your child support consistently. They want you to
Mhm.
not need someone to chauffeur you around town to go to work. You don't need to drive. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
as much as we talk about men who want to whatchamacallit. Oh Lord, I don't want to have to put this on right now. Do they even allow me to save the video? Oh,
It
I'll
should
save
allow
it.
you to save it on
It doesn't.
Instagram.
I
It's
either
not
have to
letting you save it?
mm-mm. I have to post it
No.
now
Oh, yeah,
or
yeah. Yeah, you can post it now. And you can just post it now, download it to your phone, and then delete it if you wanted to.
yeah, yeah, and then put it back up there. You're right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'll just
yeah.
do that. Okay. So yeah, and I think I'm just like, what do you mean they don't want perfection? They just want you to have the basic. And especially at I think over 35, the basics have they should be in place.
They should be,
Right?
yeah.
Because you're going to have arguments about it down the line. Like I think a lot of people, and this is where like I assess self-awareness because when people deny that folks get jealous, they get
Mhm.
insecure when it comes to money disparities. Like if one person makes 400 and the other person makes 80,
Mhm.
there's this like fantasy about like, oh, that's just fine. I want her to make more. But the reality is there was this thread on, well, I guess threads. And there were just all these women just talking about, oh yeah, I made more than him. And the person was just so jealous. They did all these things to like pull her
Mhm.
down. That's why I'm like, ask these questions, see how they feel about things, pay attention. People will be like, well, everything was just so perfect. Was it really? Because he was making
Mhm.
snide comments about your purse. He was making snide comments about how much money you spend, right?
That's a
And
good
we always
point.
miss those things. So when people get
Mhm.
mad at me for saying, but no, they're typically signs. They just don't change just because
Yeah.
they had a bad day or you had a baby. Literally, we all can look back and say, yeah, he was making snide comments about my weight. He was making snide comments about my looks, snide
Yeah.
comments about my money, my family, whatever it was,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
we're just like, oh no, maybe he didn't mean it. He was just having a bad day. But it's just like, you got to pay attention to all of that,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, I've learned. Are you going back live again? You want me to
Mhm.
re-add
Yeah.
myself? Okay. I've learned that, like, again, we tend to be emotional creatures, and so we'll try to like figure out the why of why somebody says something. Like to your point about like, oh well, he may make snide comments about the fact that you are always going on girls trips, or he
Right.
may make snide comments about the purse that you carry or where you choose to live or whatever it is, right? And so we'll not make excuses for it, but we'll say like, well, why did he say that? We'll try to analyze it. And I've learned like it doesn't really matter why it's done. All that matters is that it was done, right?
Yes.
And so like, because we want to, because we're such nurturing creatures, right? We want to like find the good in the mess. But it's
Yeah.
like, again, removing the emotion and just focusing on the data of it. Like, did this happen? Yes or no? Did it make me feel bad? Yes or no? Is that probably not good for me? Yes or no? Right.
Right.
And so for me, it's just like getting out of my own head with the emotional stuff and
Right.
just being like, this is what he did. This is what I'm paying attention to. I'm collecting data this whole time. Um, and I learned this from you, right? Like you told me, like, don't romanticize things, because I meet somebody and I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to see our wedding. And oh my gosh, we're gonna live here and this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna vacation there. Like, stop that.
Exactly.
Like,
Right. You
really
have
in the
to get out
moment.
of your head because you're gonna make up things. And it's not to say that these people aren't great folks, right? And that they're all evil. We don't want to do that. We don't want you to be hyper vigilant and thinking all people are trash. It's not what it is. I think it's more so we create such a fantasy about who we want them to be in our minds
Yeah.
that we're not willing to see people as they are, flawed human beings. So therefore, we'll say, oh my God, they're so perfect, they're so this and they're so that. Let me
Yeah.
get you on here. Hold on. Oh, I think you have to request.
Oh, I did. Let me do it again.
Okay. Oh, wait, let me see. Are you in this list?
I already
Here?
sent it. So
Invite.
you want me to cancel it?
I just invited you. You see it?
Oh, there it goes. Yes,
So,
Caroline, we cannot fix other people. We can only, we cannot. And we always want to fix somebody.
We'll always be like, oh my God, they're so great. And we're not willing just to see the little things. And I think, yeah, we'll see some really awful examples that are like really glaring. But I think there are just some other little things. Like when I bring them up to people, they'll be like, oh, you're right. Like snide comments, messy comments, shady comments. I hear it all the time. And I'm like, you have to pay attention. It's not just a bad day when they're constantly talking about why are you going on girls' trips? Why you need to be in the streets? Are you for the streets? Like all these little things that you can. And again, for example, when they say things like, oh, you for the streets, you're listening to too many incel podcasts where you hate women. So that's where I'm like, to me, that's a red flag because when I hear you repeating lingo from incel podcasts, I'm like, I don't want to be bothered with that. Right? Because that's going to be too many problems down the line. And you can just pick up on certain things, but you have to be willing to listen and really say to your intuition, what do I need to know about this person or this situation so that I can make the best decision? And you have to be willing to take action if you get information like, oh, I cheated because she wasn't giving it to me. So I was like, oh, wow. So you would do it again? Well, just don't put me in that position.
Right. Yeah.
Bye.
But he was that same person that told me all that. To your point about earlier about the cleaning, I was like, well, if her not cleaning the kitchen was the issue, why didn't you all just hire? Because he's like, this person's like a federal agent, right? I'm like, well, you make enough money. Why don't you just hire? And she was like a doctor. So I'm like, why didn't you just hire a cleaning person? It sounds like that would have eliminated the issue.
Right.
He's like, no, because like all she had to do was she didn't even work every day. She only worked certain days of the week. She could be cleaning on the days that she's not working. I'm like, but y'all have two twin boys and two other kids. So you got 4 kids. She's a doctor and she's got to also clean the kitchen. And you mad because she didn't clean the kitchen. And then you start talking to her down. Now she doesn't want to give you any. And you go out and cheat with 6 women. Like, make it make sense, right? So yes, you have to listen to what people are saying. And I think a lot of times we think that like Caroline says, we can't fix people, right? And we can't. And I think we think that we're so different, right? Like, oh, well, I'm different. He's not going to do that to me, or I'm going to be the one to change his mind. Like,
no,
people will tell you exactly what you want to, what all about them if you just shut up and let them talk.
Listen. Yes.
He tells you, like, I don't want to get married on the first or second date. Like, I'm not interested in marriage. Like, we don't need a piece of paper or whatever. That's fine. But if that's what you want, you're not going to be the one to change his mind, boo. Like,
but we will say, well, why do they still want to hang out if they don't want a relationship? Well, why are you making yourself available after he told you that he doesn't want a relationship? Of course, he's going to want to continue to see you because he told you he's not waiting for a relationship. So you have to then be able to say, well, we're not aligned, so we can't deal with each other, right? But we're not willing to say we actually don't want a relationship. We just want vibes and attention, and that's it.
Yeah.
So we'll tell ourselves like, oh yeah, of course I would, but you'll date someone for 10 years in a situationship with them. And I know people like this.
Yeah.
and nothing changes, right? And so I think we have to be, people are like, you're victim blaming. I want us to be
The
accountable
Cookie Monster voice.
for our decisions, because I cannot control them, but we can
Yeah.
control us. We can say, when you tell me that you would cheat because she wasn't cleaning house and wasn't sexing you all every weekend, we're not going to continue to see each other because you have literally told me who you are, right? So at that point, we're not going to do that. And people will say, well, you just want them to be perfect. People have to grow. You need to go and grow with a therapist and let them figure things out with you, and then come back to a relationship. Because too many people use the excuse of, well, no one's perfect. It's not, the bar has just been in hell for so long that people don't realize that you're not asking for perfection. You're literally just asking for the basics. We all come with our own issues, right? But verbal abuse, emotional abuse, clearly physical abuse should not be part of that package. I shouldn't have to tolerate you talking down to me or talking crazy to me because you're still growing. You need to go grow in a therapist's office before you talk to me like that.
Yeah. So I want to segue into the marriage conversation, or the people who are in a very serious relationship and have been in that space for like a while, right? So even if you're not married, but you have some sort of like clear commitment, right? We're not still just dating. We're not trying to figure it out. So we know that we should be, ideally, in a perfect world, right, prior to us even getting committed, we should be asking or bringing up these conversations in some sort of way, right? And I will say, before we segue into that, you mentioned earlier that, if you're someone who's talking about these things on a regular basis, then it would make sense to bring them up so it wouldn't feel weird to your person, right? Or the person that you're dating. But I find that just like we're Googling people are Googling us too, right? People are very easy to find. And I find, like, back when I was younger, and I've told this to my friends, back in the day when I was younger, if somebody didn't have like a real job, they're like a party promoter, right? And some people were actually party promoters, but a lot of the people who didn't really have any kind of career or job, they would be like, oh, I promote parties.
Yes.
Nowadays, and maybe it's an age thing, maybe it's a time thing, I don't know. Nowadays, they're investors, right? So if I meet a guy and he says like, oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I'm an investor. Sometimes they are investors, but rarely, right? Usually
full-time.
Yeah, full-time investors. Like, oh, I day trade, or I trade, whatever. And so I'm always kind of like I need to. So then because I talk about this stuff all the time, right? So I'm like, oh, great. Well, let's talk about it, right? Like, what is your favorite ETF, or what are you? We'll talk about candlesticks and all that kind of stuff when it comes to like options, right? And they don't be knowing what the hell they talking about, right? That's how I know you're full of shit. You don't even have the lingo of an investor, right? So it's like, see, now you're lying. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's a great thing that you said, because if whatever you're always talking about, like, they should be able to talk to you about it as well, right? And so if I'm already talking about this, like, or they'll bring up like a very commonly known stock, for example. It's like, oh yeah, got to get Nvidia. Like, okay, but then I'll bring up something that's like lesser known, and it's like, or I'll say like something like, well, what ETF are you into? Like, what's the ETF? Like, okay, sir, you don't know anything about this.
Once tell me, oh yeah, I'm into breath work, right? And breath work is just, it's a variety of things, but it could be really intense, or it could just be like simply doing box breathing, right? Yeah. So I could tell that he Googled me, and he was just like, oh yeah, I do breath work on my way in my he was like, I'm in a cabin in West Virginia and I'm doing breath work for an hour or so every single day. And I'm just having these like really like overwhelming crying sessions. And but I don't have any childhood trauma, no childhood trauma whatsoever. I was just like, oh, okay. And I think anyone who's read up on breath work, if you have that kind of like intense emotion come up, there is something there to it, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, do you know what breath work is? And I was just like, yeah, I know what breath work is, right? And so he's like, yeah, but I don't have any trauma. I just think it's fine. It's just, it's just natural for the. And I was just like, oh, okay. And then he carried on with some of the shenanigans later on, and I was just like, these are people who try to mirror you, right? As they're getting to know you. Like if he's like, oh yeah, I'm an investor, and he can't talk to you about ETFs, he can't talk to you about what's going on with like for example, in NVIDIA, are you really, or are you just trying to mirror me? Because those
Right.
are things that can happen. The person who took you to those expensive dates that you mentioned earlier, right? He was trying to mirror you. He probably knew that you were very successful and figured, well, I want to match her. And that's behavior. Those are behaviors that I think that we really do need to pay attention to.
Mhm.
Because at this point, I don't need to know why you did it. It's just the fact that you did it. And that's just it. If you're lying to me about your job and you're over leveraging yourself on the first couple of dates with me, that's not smart. That's just, I call it what it is. It's sociopathic behavior. It's deception, right? What if I had chosen to ignore all those signs and then, or what if you chose to ignore all those signs, get involved with them and then get into like some scamming situation with him because you're thinking, oh, he makes 270 a year, so he's great. But really he makes 70 a year. And now you're
Mhm.
waiting for him to be able to pay you back and he can't because he already
Yeah.
functions. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think ultimately, with regards to the money conversation, pay attention.
Mhm.
I don't really want to rely on what you're going to tell me. I more so rely on my intuition, but more so like what am I seeing? Right?
Yeah.
If you are earning 70 and you're spending, you're really like you're in debt over your head, like you're just over leveraged and
Mhm.
you owe child support, you owe collections, you're behind on your rent, but you live this really lavish lifestyle somehow. And the other thing is too, I want to mention this, the new rich is using business credit cards to front a lifestyle. Are you
Mm.
aware?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen people do that. I
Yeah.
the person that created that fake Google search,
Business
he does
credit.
that. Yeah, he does that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, wait. Not only did he have a fake Google search, but to your point, it's like it doesn't matter why they do it, all it matters is they did do it.
Mm-hmm.
But we were at some restaurant one day, and so he goes to pay, and I see this food stamp card, and I'm like, why do you have a food stamp card? And so
Mm-hmm.
so he pulls it out. He's like, oh, and it had somebody else's name on it. It didn't have his name on it. He's like, oh, that's my uncle. Well,
Yeah.
why do you have your uncle's food stamp card, Mr. $2 million
Right.
net worth,
It's a
right?
lot. It's
And so
and
he's like, oh, well, because he owns he owns a couple companies, and so one of them he has to like feed like all these people. He's like, well, it's less expensive for me to use the food stamp card to feed all those people than it is for me to use my own money. But if you got it like that, you don't need the food stamp card. Right. And then on top of that, you're using your quote unquote uncle's card, which I don't believe. I think it was just some person's name that they stole and used. You know what I mean? It's like
right.
your
Right.
$2
And that's
million
the thing,
net
like
worth
it's
ain't making sense, sir.
like, right,
Why you gotta do all
right,
that?
right. So with the business credit stuff, I realized I was like, oh, so this is the new hustle. So sometimes people will tell you, I kid you not, their net worth, they'll say that their net worth is what? The cumulative total of the credit that they've been assigned.
Mm,
So if someone has $5 million in credit cards, like business credit, they'll say
yeah.
net worth is 5 million.
Really? Now, see, I
And
didn't know that. I didn't know that part of the game. I just knew that they
oh,
would take. I just knew that they would like start a business, whether that business was legit or not. They would just know they could get an LLC. They would go
yeah,
file an LLC, and then they would try to build some kind of business credit, and then use that to get credit cards, and then kind of fund their life
yeah.
with those business credit cards because they tend to have a higher limit than like a personal credit card.
Well, and yeah, that's the whole. I know I've known of people who just like didn't have any revenue, but was just talking about like all the money on the credit cards, and I'll just be like, but you have to have money to pay it back. But you're talking to people that you're getting to know them. Those people would eventually be like, oh, we should go out, and I'll just be like, "Oh, okay. Right? Because at the end of the day, if you're willing to lie to a group of people about that kind of thing, those
Hmm.
are the things that you got to pay attention to. Because I could be the girl that says, oh, but everything was great. We were going on all these expensive dates, but he told me in the
Hmm.
beginning it was business credit, right? You got to be willing to ask questions. This is why I made the clarification earlier that you have to know what side you reside on. If you are in the I'm just trying to get a man's money and just get a free meal, we're not talking to you. you're going to
Mhm.
come across those scammers because y'all are made for each other, essentially, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if you're really wanting a healthy relationship with someone who is truly compatible, you do have to be willing, I think, to ask those hard questions.
Mhm.
And as far as my audience is concerned, sometimes they'll say, well, I'm waiting on him to tell me what's up. No, ma'am, he knows you're waiting. So the
Mhm.
game is going to continue until you're just like, hey, we haven't had a conversation about where this is going, how
Mhm.
we feel about each other. You know, can we talk about that? And that's how you avoid situationships, right? Because for people who get caught up, attached too quickly, you
Mhm.
have to be willing to ask those questions early. And again, I'm
Yeah.
not talking about the first, second, or even third date, but have it in the back of your mind.
Mhm.
Hey, if they have kids, are you paying child support? How
Mhm.
does that work out? You do need to know, you do need to know those things. I know people who, I have one friend, like she caught up her ex on his child support, right? Yeah, caught him up, like brought him current, essentially.
Oh.
And so,
But to me, that's just like, to me, it's like, why isn't he trying to catch himself up? Right?
oh,
Like, I get that. Okay, this is my man, and I want to help him out, whatever. But it's like, that's like a character trait to me, that you aren't like concerned that your child support isn't taken care of. And I know a lot of guys are, they feel like child support is whatever. But literally, like, the amount that most people pay in child support, and we're not talking about the celebrities, right? The amount that most people pay in child support is not anywhere near comparable to the amount that child actually needs in a month. So
mhm,
the custodial parent is usually the one that's paying more anyway. And it's
yeah,
like, you aren't even trying to contribute to
to that.
the financial health, well-being, or whatever of making sure this child is taken care of. So I know we see the stories about like such and such celebrity pays $20,000 a month. We're not talking about those kind of
No,
people.
these are people paying $300.
Right. Like, you paying $500 or 150, and you got the gall to have an
Mhm.
attitude about
And the
it.
kid is like 15, 16, so he times it out and then the
Yeah.
interest over the years, right?
Mhm.
So she caught him up and then they broke up. She can't get that money back, right?
Right.
So the question you have to ask is, why is the child support why are you so behind?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not the fact that you're on child support, it's the fact that why are you so behind and why is it so like $14,000 is a lot of money,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so a lot of men have issues. Take it up with the state. The point is, and don't let it be someone complaining about this that has multiple kids with multiple women complaining about that. Like,
Yeah.
you have a role in that. And I think when I hear conversations like that come up and they have all these like, but no accountability for it, I'm just like,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's something that you have to be willing to pay attention to.
Yeah.
You
Nicole says she said she was doing the most. I hope she learned her damn lesson. That was foolish. I agree. I
Yes,
agree. I
she
I went
did.
out I went out, this was maybe last year, with somebody who, I think we made it to like the second or third date. And it came up organically. And I think this is such a great thing that you're saying, like, just to allow things to kind of flow,
Mhm.
because the conversations came up organically. Like, I travel all the time. I travel all around the world, right? And
Right.
so we're on a date number 3, and so we started talking about travel. And I was like, he's like, where do you want to go that you haven't been? And so I mentioned somewhere, I don't know, Dubai or something. And I was like, we should go together. Half joking, half serious, right? And he goes, I probably can't go. And I was like, why? He's like, because I can't get a passport. And I was like, why can't you get it? Now, in my mind, I'm like, well, there's only a couple of reasons why you can't get a passport. It's either going to be you're a felon or you owe back child support, right? There's very
Mhm.
few other reasons why you can't get a passport. So I said, well, why can't you get a passport? Assuming that it better not be because you're a felon, right? So he's like, because I owe, back child support. And so I said, oh, well, I know that they only take that privilege away from you when you're like really, really, really far behind. And
Yes.
so I'm like, how far behind are you? And he said, it's about $21,000. And so I was like, why do you owe so much? And so he's like, well, I haven't seen my son in about 8 years. And I was like, well, how old is your son? He's like, he's 9. So I'm like, okay. And so I was like, well, have you tried to see him, or, whatever? And he's like, well, his mom wouldn't let me see him, and I just gave up. And I was like, he's like, so I wasn't about to pay child support if I couldn't see him. So I said, okay. Now I don't know if this was true that she wouldn't let us see him. I don't know. That didn't matter to me. But I was just like, to me, okay, first of all, if you with me, you gonna be on a plane, right? So that's it's not gonna work, right? Because we're gonna be going somewhere. But beyond that, like the character flaw for me was that like you have a child that you haven't seen since he was 1 and you just gave up. Like even if she wasn't trying to let you see him, like fathers do have rights, right?
Right.
And so it's not there's this whole narrative online like, oh, the woman keeps this kid away. Like you get a lawyer, you go to court, she's forced to allow you to see this child at
Right.
minimum visitation. You may not have custody, but you at least have visitation. There is a difference, right? And so the fact that you haven't even tried to see your child in all
Right.
this time is a problem for me. And then two, like because of that, you've decided, well, I'm just not going to take care of my responsibilities. So much so that they have like revoked
With
your
your
right to
yes.
even move about the world. Like that was a
Exactly.
problem for me. And I just knew at that point, like when that happened, when he said that, I knew that that was it, the last date that we were going to have. Because, for me, it was like, this is more than just a child support issue. This is a character flaw issue for
Yes.
me.
Right. Like they're not thinking about the consequence, which it's a natural consequence. Like you're not
Mhm,
doing your part in your child's life.
mhm,
Whether it's like their driver's license where I live or like
mhm.
your like that's all are big consequences. And I
Yeah.
think if you're as an adult, you're not thinking to yourself, I don't want that to happen because maybe I want to go on vacation. Maybe I want to be able to drive to my job. You're
Yeah.
not thinking about that. You're just thinking, and from my perspective as well, your resentment runs so deep that you're willing to endure those consequences
Mhm.
and just not figure out, hey, how can I come and get correct? I mean, well, current, so that I can see, so that I can travel about the world, get my driver's license back, and live a
Yeah.
normal life. But the resentment that they have towards the situation, whether it's the mother, the child, whatever, takes over. And now that child doesn't have a parent and the mother doesn't have the financial support. And then
Right.
also, I do know that, yes, some people have situations where, yeah, maybe the parent won't allow them, blah, blah, blah. But like you said, visitation is there. Go to court. As much as I see some people, how do I say this? They obsess about their fantasy football selections. You can go and go down to the courthouse and figure it out. Those clerks are always willing to help and tell you what to do, or just
Mhm.
consult with an attorney. But I think, like you said, it just comes down to character issues, and it's not about perfection. Because I know somebody's in it. Yeah, well,
Mhm.
yeah, women just want perfection. It's not about perfection. It's just the basics. That's it. And so
Mhm.
when the bar has been so low for so long, you're gonna think it's perfection because your bar is that you shouldn't have to be financially stable. Well, why wouldn't you if you want to be
Mhm.
married?
Right.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you want to do that.
Um, let's see. Bravo Mocktails and Cocktails says, "Oh my God, I had a guy once tell me that he skis. So when I asked, 'Oh, do you like blues or greens?' He was like, 'What do you mean?' And I was like, 'Well, if you skied, you would know.'"
She said that.
Right.
I'd have been like, oh, okay.
That part.
Oh my god.
Okay. So.
But seriously though, that and again, I want to say it again. That is an example of mirroring, right? When
Mhm.
we talk about and I hate to say it because it is so overused. So I like to say sociopathic behavior, but it
Mhm.
is a sign of narcissistic behavior to mirror someone. And I'm
Mhm.
not talking about borderline personality mirroring. I'm literally talking about someone who simply wants to mirror you so that they can bypass the time
Mhm.
that it would take to build trust. So if you think that, oh, we have this grand thing that I love to do in common. It's like me, I play on a few volleyball teams. It's like somebody's talking to me about setting and serving and telling me that they're a volleyball person, but they don't know about setting and serving. Like,
Mhm.
you're not a volleyball person if you don't know how to do that, or if you don't
Yeah.
know what that is, right?
Right. Right.
So pay attention to when you see someone trying to mirror you. Like,
Mhm.
that's a huge red flag for me
Yeah.
because you're trying to deceive me into thinking that we have more in common than we do, and we
Right.
don't.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the people who have been in these long-term relationships, whether it's dating for a long time or several months, even, or marriage, right? So, you know, this is one of the topics that causes folks to divorce, right, or have
Yeah.
major problems. So
Right.
for those folks who have not really sat down and had these conversations, and I say this as somebody who was in a very long relationship for 8.5, almost 9 years, and
Yeah.
every time I would bring up money to him, beyond this situation, our relationship was incredible, right?
Right.
Amazing relationship. But every time we bring up money, it would sometimes tend to be an issue. Now, towards the end of our relationship, it got a lot better, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it took a lot of time for it to get to the point where we could even discuss money without it automatically turning into an argument, so much so that I was like, forget it, let's not even talk about it. So it kept getting swept under the rug, right? So how do we, if we hadn't had those conversations early on, how do we have them now so that we can actually healthfully discuss
Mm-hmm.
our finances with our partners?
I think that that's going to be a layered thing, right? I think that in long-term relationships, when you're having fights like that, specifically about money, I
Mhm.
think you have to figure out whether or not is this an issue between us? Is one of us, for example, an overspender or, you know, irresponsible with money? So the other
Mhm.
person's just done talking to you about money. Or is it that you have a history of messy money management? Or does the person have childhood trauma around money, right?
Okay. Mhm.
So, for example, for me, because of like what happened with my ex, there was a time period when it was hard for me to even open like my banking app, right? I just
Mhm.
didn't want to
Yeah.
because there was a period of time where I was getting constant alerts around him trying to like use me for car insurance issues that would come up and get into car accidents and give them my car insurance card. And I'd have police in New York calling me like, oh yeah, you were in a car accident in Brooklyn. I'm like, sir, I'm not even
Mhm.
in New York anymore, right? So
Right.
there was a time when for me it was like really traumatic to even do that, right?
Mhm.
My father passed away, had a will, but there was like this whole estate issue with my brother and my sister. And it
Mhm.
was just like, I never want to go through that again, right?
Yeah.
So some of us do have like trauma around that. So you have to kind of figure out what that is and figure out that part first out.
Mhm.
That part first out. But what I like to do with the couples who are having money issues is this. It can be monthly, but I do think it needs to be weekly, especially if you have kids. It's like a weekly meeting, faith, family, finances, and health, right?
Okay.
So the finances part is probably going to be the biggest part of the meeting, right?
Mhm.
If you have kids, logistics can be the biggest part of the meeting, right? And so you have to figure out one of you, obviously, or typically is the more financially responsible person. What are your priorities? What are the
Mhm.
problems right now? And what are the goals, right? And then figuring out how are we going to tackle them. You might have to walk on eggshells for a few weeks or a few months with the person, just because, again, it just depends on what's going on. Because for me, a few years after my divorce, you really couldn't get me to open up my baking app. I was just like, I'm so sick of it because it was like, oh, putting a car in my name in my state, and then the state calling me like, oh yeah, so about this other car,
Mm.
and she was like, oh, open up the DMV app. I open up
Mhm.
the DMV app, and there's another car under my name, and they're saying, well,
Mm.
why don't you have insurance on the car? And I'm like, that's not my car. And then I had to kill the license plates on the car because she said that's the only way that we're not going to tie this car back to you. And so for
Oh
a
wow.
really long time, like you could not talk to me about finances. And I'll be honest too, that whole situation with him is part of the reason why I like backed off of girls just want to have fun, because I was so traumatized from like what was happening with that.
Mhm.
And so that's why I say now you have to understand like your partner's attitudes towards money. Because the
Mhm.
person I was dating at the time, he was just like, well, you just do this very like logical. But I was just like, I don't even want to talk about this shit. Like, I want to pay
Mhm.
my bills and go to sleep at night. That's it. But for him, he was like this real estate investor making great money on the tech side. And he was just like very logical, and he couldn't understand emotionally why I was having an issue at the time. And
Mhm.
so in hindsight, I think, well, eventually now what I do with couples again is that weekly meeting where you can have conversations. What makes you uncomfortable about X, Y, and Z? Why are we here with this? So, for example, something I did with my ex was because he was just a spender. I gave him a debit card with money on it, and I said, "You can do whatever you want to do with this card, but if you want to spend money from the main account, you can't do it. Because if you're
Mhm.
lending money from the main account where all our bills come out of, things are going to bounce, things are not going to get paid, right? And so I think ultimately it does come down to having hard conversations,
Mhm.
right? And two people being willing to say, okay, I'm done with this phase where we're fighting about money all the time, and being willing to set up a plan and really be honest and vulnerable. And I think the other person, that's the partner of the person who's having trouble, being allowing them to just have a safe space to talk about it instead of being judgmental. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Mhm.
Like if someone has a shopping issue, a spending issue, it's not just because they're an asshole, right? There are typically things beneath that that are causing them to do it. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, you have to be willing to say, hey, you don't have access to this anymore. But also, I want to, because I want us to be able to pay our bills, I also want to know what's causing you to go on shopping sprees. Like, I don't know if you just saw this in the news. This woman, she spent the mortgage payments, like her husband trusted her to pay the bills.
Yeah.
She spent for 7 or 8 months the mortgage payments on purses and jewelry, I think it was. And she said, well, I just needed to treat myself. And I was like, what? So
How did
now,
she how did they stay in the house for that long with no payments
oh,
being
six
made?
or 7 months is nothing. I mean, in some states, they'll send you notices, but it takes a while for the court action to actually. So finally,
Oh,
the court action came to their doorstep,
okay.
right? And that's how he found out.
Oh my
So
goodness.
she listed, she had the purses out and stuff. And I was just like, she's like, well, I just need to treat myself. And I was just like, oh, okay. Right. But there is an emotional issue behind that. Like, why would
Sure.
she be willing to jeopardize her home and her marriage just
Right.
because she needs to treat herself? Right. And so
Right.
sometimes it involves going to therapy as well to really understand that, because I know some people are ready to go into divorce court for stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I can't I'm trying to imagine me being him in that
Right.
scenario.
And what
I
would you
can't
do?
say that I would have the grace to be like, I'm gonna love you through this through therapy. Like, I would like to think that I am, but I feel like I would be like, I can't trust you.
Right.
And now we're at a point in this,
Definitely can't trust
we're at a
you.
point now where like we're almost irreparable, like not emotionally between us, but like our home, right? Like you jeopardize my livelihood because you wanted to buy a purse.
Right.
And I trusted you with this and yeah, she does need to go see therapy, but I feel like, Yaz over here on Instagram says immediate divorce. Yeah, I feel like I think the divorce would be coming. Yeah, I don't
Right.
see me
Right.
being like,
Like you got to think to yourself, because if you say, I'm going to work it out with you, and they're like, no, but I still want to manage the money. No, no.
hmm,
We just almost became homeless because
yeah,
you couldn't be trusted with that. So
right.
those are things I think with long-term couples,
Hmm.
if you're if you're saying divorce is not an option like a lot of people do, you have to be willing to have those hard conversations and
Hmm.
make some drastic changes. You cannot manage the money if you've been spending it on Louis Vuitton bags or YSL bags
Okay,
or
so for people who are spending, they have expenses that affect the both of them, right? Let's say like
Mhm,
they are a married couple or a couple that are living together, right? So
mhm,
they both have to pay, or somebody has to pay the electricity because it affects both people in the same household, right? Somebody
right.
has to pay the rent or the mortgage, it affects both people. And I think there's levels to this. And I know earlier we were talking about the 50-50 conversation, but I feel like there's all
Right.
these different ways of splitting it up, right? There's 50-50.
Mhm.
There's whoever makes more, their amount is proportionate to the amount that they make versus the other person. And
Uh-huh.
there's somebody just pays all the bills, right? There's like those
Right.
three kind of like ways that it goes. Um, how do you feel about that?
I think it depends on your goals, and I think it depends on the couple. There's some people who I think, for example, they will only have, like, let's just say it's the guy, and
Hmm.
his salary is 100,000.
Hmm.
Then they'll live on the 100,000 even if she's working. So he's
Hmm.
paying all the bills.
Hmm.
So if she makes 50,000 and he makes 100,000, and another scenario might be that she pays what, half the bills? What is it, like 25% of the bills? I guess is what it would be,
Hmm.
right? and then he pays 75% of the bills. It just
Mhm.
depends on your goals. And I think it honestly depends on the couple, because the 50-50 conversation, I think it's a weird conversation, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
that women in their 20s and both of you are just starting out, you both have to contribute to in order to get to your goals. Unless one of you is making or has a business that is making thousands of dollars and you can afford all the bills,
Mhm.
then that guy literally will not be able to fund all of it unless you're going to leave him and find someone else who is going to pay all the bills. I don't
Mhm.
have a problem with your partner paying all the bills, but I think some people have to be realistic about how much they make and how much life costs. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Mhm.
Like, you can't be a stay-at-home mom living in an expensive suburban neighborhood driving a Mercedes if your partner makes $60,000 a year.
Mhm.
That would have been the 70s or the 50s, right? And if you do, because I say this because I will have people who literally say to me, well, I don't want to have to work. Okay, so how much does he make? Well, he makes like 75,000. And I want to make sure it, and they want to have that lifestyle, right?
Mhm.
Then you have men, for example, and I'm just giving you different scenarios for example. I know someone who, yeah, I guess he would have making like a couple $100,000 a year.
Mhm.
Wife was a stay-at-home parent or stay-at-home mom at the time, and then she wanted like a nanny. She wanted like an au pair or something like that. She
Mhm.
had a nanny, but then also wanted an au pair, and she drove $100,000 car, right? And he
Mhm.
felt like it was just ridiculous, right?
Mhm.
These
Yeah.
are people who do not have conversations ahead of time about
Mhm.
what their finances need to look like. Because when you talk to both of them, they give you very similar stories. It's just from their different angles. She thinks he's cheap, and he's like, you just spend too much money, right?
Mhm.
So I think you have to be willing to have those hard conversations and be realistic for your situation. He can afford to pay all the bills, but once you have kids and you want a nanny and you're not working, then you have to be realistic. And I think the 50-50 conversation, I get it. I have zero problems with it. But I just think that there are people who are not realistic about their particular situation. If
Mhm.
neither of you make the money to be driving $100,000 car, living in $1 million homes in suburbia, how is it supposed to happen?
Right.
It's just not going to happen. And there are literally people saying, well, he just needs to go out there and figure it out. But he works at Home Depot. How is he going to figure that out? And
Mhm.
they're just literally not having those. I'll be like, but the math isn't mathing. It just doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
But they just see on social media their favorite influencers living a certain lifestyle, and they're just
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I want that too. I don't care how he gets it.
And the influencers may not even be living that lifestyle, honestly.
That's true too.
I feel like a
And
lot of
that's
times they're
the
not.
issue. They're not telling you how many lives and marriages are falling apart because people watch. And this is why I'm saying the thing about the 50-50 thing. People watch what's going on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram all day long, and they come home and they say, I want this. You have to ask yourself, what are your values? Right?
Mhm.
Ultimately, if your value is you want to be able to do that, and you go find you a man who does that,
Mhm.
but you can't hold on to someone. For example, I had another therapist call and consult with me on a couple who I want to say she made 500 and he made $100,000, and she felt
Mhm.
like he was a bum. And I was like, like he was just like, I make good money, you know what I mean? But she
Yeah.
was ready to divorce him over it because she saw on TikTok women saying how broke men this and broke men that, and she took it into her marriage, and her marriage is here about to end
Mhm.
because you're being told
Mhm.
by
And
TikTok.
yeah. That's like what we were talking about offline about like those groups.
Mhm.
We were talking about like
Yeah,
the toxic dating groups or whatever. Like I had to they're entertaining, right? They're really funny. The stories are funny, but I had to leave those because it's like it permeates your subconscious,
it
right?
did.
And my mom used to always tell me you have to be very careful about what your ear gates see and what your ear gates hear and what your eye gates see. And so like these are the gateways into your subconscious, right? Your ear gates and your eye gates.
Right.
And if you're not careful, like we can control a lot of times what our conscious is doing and thinking, but we don't have
Mhm.
a lot of control of our subconscious unless we're intentional about what the conscious is seeing, right? And so it's like being on social media, seeing all these things with this woman who's got this, $500,000 career and her husband has 100,000. Like the vast majority of people don't make over $100,000. So the fact that your man was even making $100,000 is like, it's like the top like 10% of people
Right.
anyway, right? So like
She
90%
doesn't
of people aren't even
think
doing
she's
that.
the realest person. She was just more like, you need to make more.
Yeah. And so she's like created this story in her mind because somebody on social media said, my man
Who's
bought
not
me this,
living
my
that
man.
lifestyle half the time either.
Right. And everybody wants to be like, my man, my man, my man, and it's like, oh, he bought me this, he bought me that. But it's like, I think we forget all the time about we're only seeing a highlight reel, right? Like I
Yes.
remember when I
Yes.
was married, my ex-husband and I are on good terms and everything now, but when we were married and we were getting divorced, I remember I was working in corporate America at that time, and we had taken a
Yeah.
picture like just at the house, and we were smiling and we looked really cute in the picture. And I remember showing it to my coworker, and he was like, "Oh, y'all are such a cute couple." I was like, "No, we just take really good pictures. We about to get divorced." So he was like, and he was just like,
Wow.
"What?" He like couldn't believe it because his picture looked so wholesome and cute, And we're seeing the
Mhm.
highlight reel of what everybody else has. No one is showing, like, everybody's showing the wedding. Nobody shows the hard work of the marriage. Nobody shows the arguments or the disagreements, right? Nobody shows the divorce. But we
Right.
all know that like half of marriages end in divorce. But we don't see the divorce part. We just see the pomp and circumstance and the beautiful white gowns and all that sort of stuff. And so we
Mhm.
we get excited about that sort of stuff, but like I think subconsciously we know that we're not seeing people's real lives, but that's all we see. And we are not
Well,
aware that, unfortunately, like me personally, right? I'm just going to use myself as an example. I am, and this is for anybody, right? I am consciously aware of all my bad days and my good days, but I'm
right.
only aware of your good days,
Right.
right? So it feels like everybody else is having all this success
Great
and all
day.
these wins
Yeah.
because I see, some tough times, some hard conversations I've had to have, or some uncomfortable moments, and
Mhm.
everybody else is just winning day in and day out. And I feel like I'm not. Like that's how most people operate, right?
Right.
And yeah, I'm just really annoyed by this woman you're talking about right now
Well,
because
so there's
like,
this
what?
recent example of this on, I think she's on all platforms. She's on YouTube, TikTok, and here on Instagram and
Mhm.
Facebook. Rose and Brett. And I forget her name here on Instagram, but they recently had this whole fallout where she's been saying,
Oh, the
yeah,
black
you
girl with
know her,
the
yeah,
kids and the white guy. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right.
I
And she's
know.
been telling the internet that he kind of like a Captain Save a Ho story, right? Like where
Mhm.
she was a single mom and he's this white guy who came in, he swooped in and then, just made her life all this great, right?
Yeah.
Bought her this and bought her that. Come to find out, she's like, no, I'm the one who bought the Range Rover. I'm the one who paid for the house. I'm the one who put the $20,000, whatever it was, on the house. And everything just fell apart. Now, their thing hasn't fallen apart. They're still going. But to me, it was this lesson for so many women watching, which was like, they would forward me the things on Instagram and be like, have you seen this? And I'm just like, yeah, I'm following it on YouTube. And simply everyone was watching thinking that he swept in and just she was Cinderella afterwards, right? He
Right.
paid for everything. He was six-figure earner. Come to find out, she said no, he wasn't,
Mhm.
right? And it made me think to myself, like, why would she spend the last 2-3 years, I think at least, kind of fueling this story about how much money he made and now she doesn't have to work and woo woo woo. And it's just like, then you have other women following in her footsteps and
Mhm.
they're thinking too, oh, this is what a man is supposed to do. And it's not that he can't, it's that you're literally fashioning your life based on lives that influencers are telling you that they're living, but they're literally not living. So this is
Right.
why I say to people, you have to know yourself enough to know, yeah, you may want that. But at the same time, for a lot of people, is it actually feasible for your relationship? Right?
Mhm.
If your man makes $40,000 because he worked at Home Depot and you're a cashier at Kroger's, you're not going to be living in a $50 million house or $1 million house in Bel Air somewhere, right? But
Mhm.
some people will literally come home and be like, oh, but this is the lifestyle I want to do, but not be okay. Well, how do we get there? No, it's just you need to figure it out. and then their relationship falls apart because no one's really thinking through, is that feasible for me right now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like they have these standards set by people who are not even meeting those standards themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really sad. I did see the story about the rose and bread and all of that, and then she kind of came back and said, "Oh, I was just drunk and I was mad that
Uh-huh.
day, and so I said all these things that weren't true." But it's like, girl,
No,
you might have
I
been drunk and
watch these
mad,
other
but that
people's
you were speaking truth.
breakdowns. Right.
Yeah.
And they have like these like YouTube sleuths that did all these different breakdowns. You know, who knows what the truth is, but I just think that that's a lot to lie.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
lot, and I was just like, "Wow," but more importantly for me, it was reading the comments of all the women who definitely bought into it. They bought
Mhm.
into, "Oh, he did this, and he did this for you, and da, 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 and now I want my relationship to look like this," and they're kinda it's like you gotta have your own sense of self, right?
Yeah.
And she created a whole image for you in order to get likes and comments, and I know some people end relationships because, "Oh, you may be a good person, but you don't make enough." You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think if the person's a great person, loves you, and has a plan for their life that they're executing on, don't get me wrong,
Mhm.
then go ahead and be with them.
Yeah.
But to say, you know, end a relationship just because you want to go be with a scammer that's scamming
Mhm.
credit cards, you know, when the
Yeah.
PPP loan people come around, what are you going to do? You know,
Right.
and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. I think it's important to figure out you just had me kind of thinking. I think it's important to figure out what it is that you want for your financial life and for your life
yes.
in general, right?
Mhm.
Beyond just finances. And then back into that. I don't think we really know what we want. You
Mm-mm.
know, like what do you truly want, excluding whatever social media tells you, excluding what your friends are doing, what you think your friends are doing, right?
Mhm.
Um, what do you really want?
Like remove the superficial. What
Right.
does
And
life look
then
like?
back into that when it comes to the money, right? So then you can have the conversations because it's not like, oh, we're just arguing about money because we're having trouble paying our bills. It's like, okay, we know that we want to be debt free by the end of 2025, right?
What are we
What
doing
are
there?
we doing to make that happen? Right. And then
Right.
we can have a conversation about the goal because now we have a collective effort that we're supposed to be making together as
Yes.
opposed to just like you don't make enough money. But again,
So
it's
when I
really
said
like,
earlier that we have to be realistic, that's exactly what I mean. There are
yeah.
people who will not even think, oh, we're in debt. We
Hmm.
have to have a plan to get out of debt.
Right.
They just think, no, I want to floss and I want to look on Instagram like I have all the expensive things, but you're in debt to your eyeballs.
Right.
Right.
So maybe we can floss, but we gotta
Mhm.
get this debt taken care of first, right?
Yes.
So if the goal is to floss, like life is to be lived, right? Like have your cake and eat it
Mhm.
too, but we can't eat it all at the same time, right? So
Right.
we gotta take care of this debt first. We don't have any
Mhm.
emergency savings, so let's get those two things taken care of. These are our immediate goals, and then our fourth year goal is that okay, now I can buy you the Mercedes because we have all this. We have a gap between our income and our expenses now, and now we
And I
can
honestly
afford
think
to buy this thing.
uh-huh. And I honestly think that those couples are the happiest. I think those couples who are in sync with each other, they have a plan, they're executing on the plan, and
Mhm.
none of it is about what social media says. Like,
Mhm.
I've been having so many conversations with people about just how they're burnt out from it all,
Mhm.
right? And so, how could they not have their lives be based on what they see on social media? And we've all done it to a certain extent. I just think that now we're starting to realize that a lot of this isn't realistic. It's not
Yeah.
sustainable. So you
Yeah.
can't really say if the two of you together make six figures. Because I'll be honest, I'm still in those like financial forums on Facebook. And some people are just in really impossible situations. And luckily those people aren't, I don't think they really care about Boston or whatever on Instagram. It's
Mhm.
more so like you'll see them talk, well, my husband does this and he does this, and this is how we're going to put together in order to get the debt down and then save our money or whatever. I love seeing that because they're realistic about their situation. It's not
Mhm.
this pie in the sky about, well, yeah, we have debt, but I need to make it look like I'm going to Greece and being
Mhm.
in the ocean and being there for 10 days and my husband did this. And it's just like, but
Yeah.
for who? These people don't know you and some of them don't even like you. So
They don't even know. They will forget about you as soon as the next person shows their picture.
right.
Yeah.
So if it's just a floss, then child, just let it go. Just let it
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
know we have to go soon.
Yes,
So
we do. We've been here for a long time.
I
But
know.
I want to add some, so I just want to kind of wrap up with some takeaways, right? So
Uh-huh.
for me, again, like I said earlier, like this is as much for me as it is for y'all, right? So the first thing is if you're in the dating pool, right? You're trying to like
Mhm.
figure out who your person's going to be.
Yeah.
The goal that Ginger says that we should do is to figure out at least as much of the money conversation, have as many money conversations in an organic way
Yeah.
prior to even getting committed, prior to the feelings getting caught, prior to you like falling deep in, right? Because you don't
Right.
want to be a year down the line and find out this person has just ruined all of their money life.
Right.
And now you have to contend with it, right?
Right.
So I think that's great because I would have thought that the conversation should have happened maybe after we are committed, but before we're like deeply committed, right? Like after we say, okay, we're in a relationship, but you're saying ask those questions before you even get there, which I think is great. It's so
Right.
smart.
Because what if you get there? Well, what if you like get committed? You're like, oh, I love this person, and
Mm-hmm.
then you realize like they have pending PPP loan issues that if you
Right.
knew, you wouldn't have moved forward with them. Or
Sure.
again, child support issues are really
Yeah.
common. Or you know, some people they get married in a few months, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
the IRS hits them up and says, "Oh, you don't get a check. You don't that tax return you were enjoying every single year. Now that you guys have filed together, you don't get that anymore because it
Right.
has to go towards this."
Right.
So I think you should know, and it kills, I think, for some people the party. But when you've been through enough situations, you're like, "I want to know ahead of time.
Yeah.
Like I'm done with just vibes. It's just like we can have vibes after I know who you are, and I think it's
Right.
important to know who the person is
Mm-hmm.
before
And
you
then
jump."
I can have the vibes, or we can have the vibes more freely, right?
Yes,
Because
yes,
like I know we're in a good space, or I know you're in a
yeah,
good space, and I know I'm doing my thing. So it's like I'm not in the air wondering what I'm
exactly.
going to get down the line. So yes, I love that piece of advice.
Because
I
I
love
can
it.
love you freely when I know, you know, that we're on the same page and I know who you
Yeah,
are. Yeah.
yeah. So I love that. The second thing, as far as the people who are in relationships or um, you know married, right? It's time to
Mhm.
have the hard conversations, right? Like there's no pussyfooting around this, as my like dad would say, right? You gotta
Right.
sit down, have the conversations. But I think to my point earlier, like figure out the collective goal and then
Yes.
work toward that, work backwards from that goal. And it's easier to have that conversation because you both are on a team. And I think what's also important, I think you would agree with me, Ginger. I think a lot of times when people have arguments or issues, they think it's them against each other instead of them against the problem, right?
Yes.
So it's like
Mhm.
us against it, not me against you. And so if
Exactly.
we can get on the team together and realize that we together are tackling this
Right.
money issue or this thing that we have not yet done that we feel we should have done by now. Now we're like
Right.
1, 2, 3, go. Woo, like we're together making
And
it
a really
happen.
good way to look at it is like we talked about like someone having like a spending issue. It's not
Mhm,
me against you because you're the evil person with the spending issue. It's us
mhm.
against the spending issue.
Yeah.
Right? It's I love you and I want us to have this house that we want to have in this neighborhood. But the spending issue is the problem. Not you are spending so much money
Mhm,
on at Saks Fifth Avenue. It's we have to figure out how because when you create safety for that other person, you allow them to be vulnerable, to
mhm,
be able to say, you know what, sometimes I have a bad day at work. And before I come home, I want to order something on Amazon. And if you've ever had a spending issue, then you know that when that thing comes, you don't even care about it, right?
mhm.
It just comes and you kind of put it away. Some people don't even open the box, right?
Right,
It really is just like it's an emotional issue wrapped up in money. And
right.
so that person does need to feel safe in order to address certain things with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for joining today, Ginger. You can
You're
follow her on
welcome.
Instagram at Loving Me After We, which is such
Mhm.
a brilliant name.
Mhm.
Loving Me After We on Instagram. Um, And then you should also follow me here on YouTube. Click the subscribe button if you have not yet subscribed. Click that bell button to turn on the notifications and give this thumbs up. Give this video a thumbs up if this has been of value to you. All right. We do have one question from Breezen. Hey Ginger
Mhm.
and Gwen, could you could you answer the question I posted in the question box? It's money.
Oh,
It's sort of on topic.
oh, there's no questions in the questions box.
So there's no
On
questions.
Instagram?
Yeah, on Instagram.
It can take a while to come up. Or was it in the original?
Oh, it may have been the original one. Can you ask it again, Breezen?
Yeah, it's not if you asked it in the first live because it got cut off.
Oh, this is in the first. It's in the first one. Okay, so ask your question again real quick, so she can answer it, or we can answer it before we head off. Oh, by the way, if you're not a member of the Get Money Crew on Facebook, you're going to want to join that. That is completely free. We talk about topics like this and a bunch of other really amazing topics, such as ETFs to be investing in, such as we'll be talking about insurance pretty soon and all sorts of other things. You're going to want to join the Get Money Crew. That is 100% free, and I will drop the link in the chat for you. If you are not yet a member, you just go to Facebook, request to become a member, and I will let you in, assuming you're not a scammer or some sort of, person that's coming in to troll my group. But I don't see the question yet from Breezen, so maybe we can answer it offline.
Or you can just...
Oh, here it is. Here it is. I was dating a man and lent him money for a concert, $266. Now he's acting funny and hasn't given me my money back. So is the question, what should you do? Oh, how do I tactfully ask for it back? I would love that because I have friends who owe me money too, not a man, but friends who owe me money and they ain't paid me and they get real, sensitive when you ask. So yeah, what would you say?
If you have the text message and you have an iPhone, I would click reply on that particular thing. Hey, what's up with the status of this? When can I get? I would get a message from them admitting that they owe it, and if they did, and I'm not talking about a friend, but like if it's serious enough, if it's enough, I would just be like, get them to admit it and then say, hey, I can take it to court. Or I'm not talking about your friends, Gwen.
Yeah, sure.
If it's just some random dude and he don't want to give you the money back and it's money to you, then you need to be able to get him to admit to that and say, hey, I can take it to court and get this money back. So you can do that, or you can just give it back to me here. But I tend to go based on Judge Judy. We don't lend that money.
Yeah. Does Judge Judy say that?
Because I don't want the thing to cut off again.
Yeah.
I think it's like an hour they give me.
All right. So Danny said, Rihanna said it best, B better have my money for sure. All right. So before it cuts off on us on Instagram or here on YouTube, we're going to go ahead and go. But thank you all for joining. Don't forget to join the Get Money Crew. Follow Ginger on Instagram. Follow me here on YouTube and Instagram as well. I am the Gwen Show on Instagram. Thank you for joining. I'll see you all next week. Have a wonderful day. Mwah. Bye. Okay.